It's really exciting being here. First of all, welcome to Creative Mornings Houston. I love Creative Mornings Houston. It's something that I was actually introduced to back in October. After the first time coming here, I was like, all right, looks like this is going to be a regular instance. So whenever I'm in town, I definitely try to make it. And Carmen had mentioned a few things, and we were talking about different topics. And when it was in the pipeline that fantasy was a topic, I was like, this is like right up my alley. I mean, I'm a fashion photographer. And if you think about it, 90% of everything in fashion, ad-based, is really a fantasy. It's a production. So I want to really talk about how we can get fantasy and how it works with creatives and people everywhere, and then how it can make a positive impact for people out in the real world. Like, hey, what's reality? What's fantasy? What kind of hopes and dreams do people have? And going from there. So, yeah. So I don't know if I have a clicker here. How's this work, Carmen? Do I just right-click? All right, bam, that's me. And this saying is something I used to put up on Facebook quite a bit until my publicist, Sydney, who I love so much, was like, quit putting it every day. But it is something I really do believe. And it's if I ask to photograph you, it's because I think you're beautiful just the way you are. I actually like you with your wrinkles, blemishes, and little imperfections. That's really important to me. I shoot a lot of stuff on analog film. In today's society, I think it's just really pushed out there that you have to look a certain way, you have to meet a certain type of look and standard that's really not based on who you are. They're telling you, hey, this is what we think is beautiful. It's a 5'10" blonde girl with blue eyes, that's a 34, 24, 34, that's really not realistic. Now, if somebody's born that way and they're naturally beautiful, hey, there's nothing wrong with that, great. But to have an example and tell people like, hey, this is how you're supposed to look, this is what the definition of beautiful is, that's really a fantasy there. So that's kind of going to be a little bit about what we talk about. So that is it. So I love it. What is fantasy? And of course, I love Supertramp. So Dreamer is a great song for this because I think fantasy has a lot to do with dreaming and then kind of figuring out the difference between dreaming, fantasy. Is there a correlation? Is there something that is together with both of them, and how do they relate to each other? So yeah. I was thinking, what song would totally speak to this? And I was like, well, that's it right there. So yeah, I can say goodbye to Supertramp. You'll do it? All right, I'll give you like a pointer. What?
Yeah, here.
See if it works. Oh, no.
It should be. Technical difficulties, don't worry. We'll make it work.
All right. I'm without a screen. No, I'm kidding. So we're going to dive into this, and we're going to see some cool slides. And really, I think what I want to talk about is when you're growing up as a kid, I think there's a perception and kind of a dream that you have, and everybody's idea of what fantasy is totally different. So I really want you to go back into that 5-year-old kid that you were, and like, what was your fantasy then? Was it going to the moon? When somebody said fantasy, was it thinking of like Snow White, castles, dragons, things of that nature? Or was it like, hey, I'm going to be an accountant, I'm going to be a CPA, something of that nature? So I don't know. It really, I think, and it changes. And then, there's nothing wrong with evolving and kind of morphing into different fantasies. And then, hey, why not still enjoy it? So, yeah, there we go. Bam. No, it's awesome. So we're going to go into that. Let's see. It's okay. It gives me a few more minutes to enjoy Topo Chico, one of our proud sponsors. See, but they would probably want like somebody like Brad Pitt up here, so not a fluffy guy like myself. But hey, I do love the product, so it's good stuff. There you go. Would your fantasy include unicorns, dragons, castles? Gold at the end of the rainbow. That's it. Yeah, I think so. We can all agree, yes, something cool. Everybody has a different fantasy. And let's go. Oh yeah, unicorns, dragons, gold, yes, please. Anything that's awesome is cool. And it's funny, like I just landed 2 days ago from Asia. And I came back to vote, and I think that's really important. We had a crazy election cycle, and it doesn't matter who won. And I want you to go back, if you can go back to that one. It's important that you guys realize one thing, that each person here, regardless of your candidate winning or losing, has a fantasy. I mean, they want to do something for themselves, for their people, for their followers. And it's our goal to kind of, try to get it and make it work somehow. So I wanted to incorporate that because I think that's like a big fantasy for people, especially coming back. It's a very electric voting thing, and it's our right. So I thought that was cool. I thought it meant with the, it kind of went with the topic. And yeah, some people right now are saying, holy smokes, Donald Trump's president. And other people are like, I am so glad. So that is fantasy. Everybody has a fantasy. What we have to do is embrace that and kind of say, hey, what is your fantasy? How can I help you with yours? How can I help you realize it? So yeah, from dragons to an election cycle, and I think it's pretty much close. So I really wanted to kind of get an idea and look up the actual definition. Google's great for that, so I looked it up. And what we're going to do is we're going to really focus on the first one, and this is the faculty of activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. So ask yourself, what is that? And I think you got to go back to that 5-year-old kid. Like, when you were young, how did that change? Where are you right now? What is that fantasy? How has it changed? Has it changed? I mean, do you still want to do what you're doing? How can you make your fantasy a reality? How can you morph it into a dream and then put kind of an action plan together? So I happen to work, as I mentioned, in a really interesting industry. I work in fashion. So it can be beautiful, it can be magical, it can be romantic, but it can also be very superficial, and there can be some little negative pundits to it. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. And really, my talk is based on a lot of this, and we'll go slow on the slides. I'll let you know when to change them on this, Carmen. But this is really important. I think when we look at this image, everybody knows that's Justin Bieber. That's Justin Bieber. That's not Justin Bieber. But it's what's forced upon us every single day. And if we have a fantasy that we want to live and we want to actually succeed and do, we have to live our fantasy. We have to, aspire to accomplish our goals, our dreams, and come to a realization that, hey, some people are going to tell you, hey, this is what your fantasy should be. Say, screw them. Your fantasy should be your own fantasy. What you want to do, what you want to be. There's nothing wrong with this. Or maybe there is. I mean, the kid's a good-looking kid. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I wish I was that skinny. I'm a fluffy guy. I was like, I would die to be that dude. But I would rather be my natural, fluffy self than totally photoshopped and not who I am. So what I want you to realize is every time you're out there and you're looking at these ads, you're looking at these commercials, and you're seeing this perfection, it's really a fantasy. It's not, it's a production. I mean, there's professional, big-time elite models that are telling you it's a full-blown production. When they wake up, they don't look like that. A few do. But there's still a whole process that makes them look how they want you to perceive them. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide is a Victoria's Secret model. And you might not notice little differences, but there are a few. And as a photographer, I shoot a lot of analog stuff. Analog means your old school film, type you develop, you take out of a camera. And it has to do with a lot of the projects I'm working on, especially one called Encounters, where it's just portraits of people, just the way they are, no Photoshop, no retouching. But if we look at this, even this girl, a full-blown top model that's doing the catalog work for Victoria's Secrets, she's Photoshopped. She has to be skinnier. There's some natural arm there. I don't know. It's just the contour of your body. It's her body. It's her shoulder blade. It's not acceptable. So, I mean, is that reality or is that fantasy? What are we telling everybody? What are we kind of forcing down their throat, saying, hey, you have to look a certain way? This girl is not hot enough. I mean, it's crazy if we think about it. Like, okay, I can't take her out to coffee. No, I want this version. Please, I will not ever hang out with this girl because she's just horrendous, as you can tell. So yeah, let's go on to another one. Same thing here, beauty campaign stuff. Beautiful person on this side. Both images are cool. Now, if she naturally looks like that, hey, more power to her. But this will never fly in an ad world. It'll never fly in a magazine or on a billboard. It's a fantasy. They're telling you, hey, this is how somebody looks every day. Maybe, but the majority of people know. They have imperfections, and there's nothing wrong with that. Imperfections, I think, are beautiful. It makes you who you are. I don't know if it was Dove or somebody, but they did a fashion shoot where they had like 4 or 5 girls, and they totally did a fashion shoot. They photoshopped their images, they did the hair, makeup, and at a later point, they actually showed them the results. And the girls were quite stunned, I think. You know, they looked at him and they're like, hey, at some point I really believed that this is what I wanted to be. This is who I wanted to look like. But then the girl was like, I don't see my freckles. You know, I don't see the gap in my tooth. It's really not who I am. So, you know, we really have to kind of accept who we are. Kind of, you know, be happy with ourselves. Love yourself. I'm a fluffy guy. If I want to be skinny, hey, it's because I want to be skinny. It's because I want to have more energy to go hiking or whatever. It's not because some dude in a boardroom is telling me that I'm not a good-looking dude being a fluffy guy. Screw that guy. So let's, we'll change it. Same thing there, just another image. So I don't know what y'all notice, if y'all notice much of a difference. But that is what you're gonna see every day. That's what you're gonna see out here on Main Street. You know, you go downtown on billboards, going down 59, ad campaigns, Chanel, Cartier, whoever it is. You know, there has to be a change. There's some change that's actually happening now. Victoria's Secret just recently did a campaign where one of their models actually had her stretch marks. I mean, the girl was like a size 2. But she's a human. She has a body. She has skin. She actually grew from a baby to a full-length human being. So she has stretch marks. They left them on there, and there was just an outpour on social media of people thanking them and telling them, hey, we appreciate this. You know, there's certain things. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to show some of my images too, or maybe some of these are, that are going to show some. This one isn't, but that are going to show some Photoshop. And it's just kind of even putting myself in that mindset where I'm trying to change as a photographer, change as a person, and empower people to really kind of do that. But if I'm not practicing what I preach, then why am I doing it? Let's go on to one more. This is a campaign for a cosmetic company. This girl is 16. Perfect, beautiful young girl, perfect skin, but it's not perfect enough. Can we go to the next one? You know, there's a few blemishes there, but even those few blemishes would never be accepted on an ad campaign. It's just how it is. And I think our job is to really separate fantasy from reality and saying, hey, is there anything, you know, wrong with it? You know, what's wrong with reality? You know, I have a lot of clients that sometimes come to me, and I've had some clients that I have totally lost because they want to be Photoshopped, they want to be transformed. Maybe a 60-year-old philanthropist or a socialite here in Houston. Hey, I want to look like I'm 40. I'm like, hey, you know what? I actually like you the way you look. I can't do that. Maybe if I was a Photoshop wizard, I probably would, but that's just not my forte. But I think it's important that, you know, with this topic, fantasy, it's like we go back to that definition, what is it? And, you know, my example is really based on the industry I work in and how we can change that. Yeah, so this is really one of the things I really believe in. Fantasy is great, but real life can be pretty magical too. So I want you guys to think about that and go back, and I'll harp on this for a little bit, go back to that 5-year-old kid. Maybe 10, I don't know. I don't know where it's changed. But everybody wants to have a fantasy. How is that different from a dream? I really had that question, and I was researching that. You know, when you're on a plane for 30 hours, you can do a lot of reading. So that's what happens when you fly on a budget. So you visit like 4 countries before you actually get to your destination. So your 3 weeks of working actually are 2 weeks because you're like 3 days in airports. But you know, when I looked at the definition and what a lot of people say about fantasy and talking to some friends and even asking some people in Bali where I was about fantasy, I think the number one thing I got was that it's just a full-blown imagination. Fantasy just allows you to go out there and think of the wildest things. And that's why I put that example, you know, unicorns, rainbows, whatever. You think about it, Pegasus. I mean, I don't know, whatever you guys might have, and I think it's one of the questions that I have on, you know, on your little name tag is what your fantasy is. But what's the difference between a fantasy and a dream? I think people have dreams as well, and they really do correlate. They have a lot to do with each other. But I think when you talk about dreams, dreams are actually attainable. You have to wake up, you got to dream big. But you got to actually put together something to make it happen. You know, if you just wake up and you fantasize all the time about stuff, it's not going to happen. You know, put it down. Say, hey, what's my fantasy? What's like the ultimate fantasy? If yours is owning an exotic sports car, okay, cool. Put together some plan to get it going. If you want to go to Mars, who had Mars on I saw it on their name tag. Call you out. Come on, pick. I noticed it. That was pretty awesome. So you know, I don't know if you can say going to Mars is a fantasy or if it's actually a dream or if it's reality. Yeah, somebody, 20 years ago, hell no, that was just straight up fantasy, guaranteed. But now there's talks about it like, hey, this might be possible. People might not die. If we actually we can get them there somehow, maybe about 5 years later, but hey, it's actually getting closer to that. So what is a fantasy for one person or maybe one time frame might become a dream. And what might be a dream might become a reality at some point. So these photos here, I don't know if I have photos after this. Carmen, do I? Thank you very much, because you can sneak peek. This is a project I'm doing called Encounters, and it's with one of the largest publishers in fashion in the world. And I don't know, I just started this probably about 4 years ago, and it's morphed a little bit. But these are all just strangers that I've ran into on the street, in the subway, you name it. It's taken with black and white film. It's a high key light type photo. It's rather random when you come up to people with a really bright LED light and tell them on the middle of the street in New York, like, hey, can I take your photos? And they're like, yeah, cool. So this is real life. This is, this is not fantasy. This is reality. This is beautiful. Those dudes, I have no idea. So this was Fashion Week. This is 2 years ago. Fashion Week, I'm coming back from kind of the Chelsea area. And these two dudes were just laughing and laughing. They were on a corner. I was walking about a block away. And, heading back to my hotel. This was in February, so it was cold as hell. These dudes didn't have a jacket or anything. I was 100% positive they were just lit. I was like, these guys are gone. They are drunk. And I really was just walking and kind of looking at them and kind of just, observing them and kind of the laughter they had. So I went up to them and talked to them. And it turned out that they're brothers, and they hadn't seen each other for about 8 years or so. And this guy's from St. Louis. And that was the first time they were just out. And I was like, dude, aren't you cold? He's like, I don't have a coat. It's not cold where I come from. And I was like, all right, cool. And I was like, so what are y'all doing? He's like, well, we're just walking around. And yeah, that was the cool thing. I was like, hey, you mind if I take a photo of you guys? They're like, no, that was cool. But I mean, I think those are kind of the interactions that are for me, they're cool. They're interesting. And at some point, that was a fantasy to me, to be able to photograph people, to come up to them and just random people and say, hey, you know what? I like your look. I dig you. Let me take your photo. And then, of course, you got to have a selling point. You got to know how to approach people, because if not, you'll get robbed. But especially in like Tokyo and some areas. But these are just random people that are just out there doing their thing. I mean, this was her boyfriend or somebody, but they were at a club. And I was like, why does that dude have like a mask of a bunny or of a rabbit? But it was such a great moment. I asked him to take the photo. But this is, these photos here are not retouched. They're straight off of film, how they are. And they're beautiful people just the way they are. Every single person here is just randomly like, hey, can I get your photo? And, I kind of like to light it and show different features for different people. But I think that's important, So you have to really love things. You have to have passion for them. That's what fantasy is. Fantasy is when you were a kid and you were like, man, I really want to do this. Why? I don't know. I just want to do it. Maybe you're in the backseat of a car and you see an 18-wheeler go by and you're like, I want to be a trucker. That's a big truck. And I think it's cool. This is an interesting story. Well, this photo was taken in Bolivia. This is in the middle of some salt flat. And there was some, I don't know, it was a protest, actually. And I talked to her, she was cool. This dude was super awesome. That was taken in Japan, in Tokyo. And I went out on a day, and I was like, you know what? I want to go out, and I want to capture some photos, and I want to go out there and just really see what is out there. So I went to, it was the first time I was in Tokyo. And there was a street crossing. I don't know if y'all have ever Googled it or something, but it's like the largest street crossing in the world. I don't know what district it is. If we Google it, we can find it. But it was cool. I mean, it was a cool place to go people watch. If you're a people watcher, I'm a big people watcher. That's like the place to go. Every time the light changes, you literally have 20,000 people crossing the street. Of all these people, this dude was really tall. He was like 6'7", 6'6", somewhere around there. And look at that. I was like, well, that is amazing. So I saw him from a distance, and being the total toned athlete that I am, I just ran him down as fast as I could. And I begged him for a photo. I was like, dude, I have to have your photo. He was like, yeah, no problem. As soon as I said that, he just kind of put his arms out. And I just started snapping away. And then he took off his shades, and then we started talking a little bit. It turns out he's from Afghanistan, and he's lived in Tokyo for 20 years. And he's like this self-meditation guru, kind of philosopher, tarot reader, just mystical dragon unicorn type dude. That is that dude in the life. So he gave me a card. It was like a little green card. On his card, it had kind of I don't know if you would think of it as, how do I put this? A guy riding a carpet. I mean, it was really that cliche. It was the dude riding a carpet with like a turban, little mustache. He looked cool, like something straight out of the Cartoon Network. So I was like, all right, cool. About a week later, I just kind of tried to find him on Facebook. I wanted to send him the photo. And I added him, never heard back from him. But he has a photo with the Prime Minister of Japan. So I was like, I don't know who he is or what he does, but obviously that dude's living his fantasy. I mean, I was like, I want to be this guy. So you see, everything out there, we might look at it, we might judge it from the outside and say, this guy's a little crazy, but he was full of life. He definitely has a fantasy. He'll definitely tell you your fantasy, probably if you don't even know it. So if y'all need his contact info, I will gladly pass it out. But that was kind of the beautiful thing, that from the outside, you look at this person, and you wouldn't really think much about it. And, he looks a little charming and just colorful and cool. But, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, when you find a photo of him with the Prime Minister of Japan, you're like, okay, I don't know how you met him or how that came about, but it was cool. So that is kind of the reality of that. This is something I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, and kind of going back through all the different photos from what we're looking at and the definition. How do you use fantasy? How do you use it to impact, your community, your friends, your family, whoever it is? And it can go from many different ways. I mean, from the photos of your 5-year-old vision of what a fantasy is to, the election cycle that just happened that's, pretty divisive. Everybody still has a fantasy. So when you got up a little while ago, and it was the first time we've done that, I thought that was really cool. Everybody met, whether you knew each other or not. Hopefully you met somebody that you didn't know. But it'd be kind of cool. You ask them, hey, what's your fantasy? And you can read what they have. And I saw a few different things. Weather might be crazy in the back, I don't know. But, I wonder how that's different from your 5-year-old fantasy. And I go back to 5-year-old because I think that's a good age where, you're just dreaming of a whole bunch of stuff. You're thinking about, you're innocent. You're like, hey, this is what it is. That's why you always have a little kid tell you straight up how you look or if something's right or wrong. They're like definitely the judges to be. But, I think it's important that, to help other people and to realize theirs. I think first you have to find out what your fantasy is, what your goal is, what you want for yourself, and then how you can make it happen. So, you want to live your fantasy, not someone else's. Go back and make it happen, like, hey, this is what it is. How can I change that from a fantasy to a dream to a reality, And there's nothing wrong with having fantasies that just never happen. Hell, I want a Lambo. I've always wanted a Lambo. It's not like on the highest priority list, or I would have stayed working in corporate America in the med center. But, if it happens, hey, cool, that's fantasy come true. But that'll be some far off, distant land and dream. But I think that's really important to kind of know what you want, love yourself first before you kind of can go out there and talk to other people and say, hey, this is what your fantasy. And don't judge people. Like, they might have some crazy fantasies. Like, all right, cool, man. I hope that happens. Maybe some you don't want to help, with their fantasy coming true. But for the most part, this is really important. And I think that's really important right there, where I put learn to love others. And I think people say that all the time, and it's a little cliche, especially right now. It's like, hey, you know what? This happened, or this is going on. Your baseball team. I mean, think of like Boston Red Sox fans and New York Yankee fans. They hate each other. Like, they do not like each other. But if we think back, there was a game right after 9/11 at Fenway Park. So you have the New York Yankees coming to Fenway. They're hated rivals, and definitely not anybody's fantasy to see them win at there in Boston. but they had some compassion. They knew what just happened in 9/11. And what they did was so cool. They played New York, New York. And I've seen that video on YouTube a few times, and it's kind of hard to find. But I thought that was just like the really cool example of, what they were doing for each other. And they kind of realized that, during that time, like, hey, you know what? We're going to put aside our needs, our desires, kind of what we want, and go from there and look to somebody else and say, hey, what is your dream? What is your fantasy? What are you feeling? What is your pain? What is your happiness? What is your anger? Just channeling all that in. And that was cool. So, yeah, that was that. And I think that comes down to this, encouraging others. Not just encourage people, but actually empathetically listen to them. Say, hey, what do you want to do? How do I want to make this happen? And kind of asking yourself, hey, is there anything I can do to help that person with their fantasy? It's, I think, let me look back. 7, 8 years ago is when I was working in corporate America. I worked at Methodist Hospital down the street. And I told my boss that I was leaving to be a photographer. And there was not a moment or even an instant where they kind of laughed it off or said anything. The boss that I had was a little bit depressed because I was like the only person in cardiology that did anything. I was literally because I was the only person. It's not because I was a good employee. I was the only person there. But from the moment I kind of mentioned my dream and say, hey, you know what? I want to pursue my creative side. I want to do the photography. A little bit about my background. We'll get into that in a bit. But never was there a hesitation there where they said no. Right off the bat, he's like, let me know what I can do to make it happen for you. Have you thought about this? What can we do? Is there anything that we want? And then they actually took the time. He's like, hey, let's have lunch. And he asked me, what are you trying to do? What do you want to do? And that was the exact question. He didn't use the term fantasy, but he did use the term dreams. He's like, hey, what's your dream? What do you want to do? I was like, I want to pursue photography. I want to do this full time. He's like, all right, do it. He's like, you need to do this. These are some of the risks. He happened to be an artist on the side that did clay works and pots and stuff of that nature. So he provided a lot of insight of what was needed. So not only did he encourage me, but he kind of helped me. He's like, hey, pitfall, don't do this, don't do that. Don't go spend your whole 401k partying in Europe. He didn't say anything about partying in Asia, so that was great. But so they put a plan, together, like make it happen. So, talk to people, ask them, hey, what's your fantasy? What do you want to do? What's your big dream? What's your goal? And then try to make them, happen. So I don't know. That's a little bit about me. That's my photo. Taken by Tracy Tesmer, who's an incredibly talented photographer. The type of photographer that I hate because they're naturally good. And you can never compete with them. And she took that photo a long time ago, but I appreciate that photo. Carmen? So thank you, everybody.